You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch movies and TV about mushrooms, cordyceps.
I was going to say watch TV about gruff father figures and precocious young girls.
I mean, that's what it is. That's our show, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yep. It's so...
Who needs therapy? Who needs therapy?
You just get a podcast. That's all you need.
People love Pedro Pascal.
So, did you watch his Hot Ones? I sent you a clip of it.
I forgot.
Yeah.
I knew I was supposed to, and I forgot.
That's okay. The reason people love Pedro Pascal is not his character in The Last of Us. It is his real personality in interviews. He's so silly.
I've encountered a lot of things that make me really like him. I'm not saying I don't get it.
Yeah.
But people really love Pedro Pascal.
He's a silly boy, and he is sort of, he's a big supporter and maybe member, we don't know, of the LGBTQ community. He's very fashionable and takes lots of risks.
I do remember his Met Gala. This isn't the podcast for this, but the Met Gala makes me furious. And I know I'm not the first person to say this, but that 90% of the men just show up in a tux where like maybe the lapels are a different color or something.
It's maroon and not black. It's like
they should be turned away at the door.
Yeah. They
shouldn't be allowed in.
Agreed. He takes fashion risks. He flirts with his male friends. He's silly. He's fun. Mm-hmm. I just think that he's like a charming human. And none of that comes across.
Yeah, he seems pretty unproblematic.
So far, yeah.
He's great in this. We watched The Last of Us. Oh, I'm Andrea.
And I'm Jody.
And we watched The Last of Us.
Yes. And
is this bringing our post-apocalyptic journey to a close?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Because we'll talk about what next week is. It's not post-apocalyptic in the way that these have been. But it's sort of like weird, creepy tech dystopia future.
Okay, so so we're not saying goodbye to future dystopia, but we are saying goodbye to the post-apocalypse.
Yes, there are no mushrooms in next week's show.
Thank God for that.
I almost made my background today a picture from the slumlord apartment that I lived in before this one, with the mushrooms growing out of the wall when I came home from a vacation. Horrifying.
Love them, hate them.
Yeah. So Last of Us is something that I had seen. I watched the first season. I've talked about it on the show before, the whole episode 3 of it all. But you hadn't seen it.
Nope. I knew a lot about the video game, though. Did we talk about that last week? I knew a lot about the video game. Like, I sort of know, I think I know where this is headed. For season
interesting.
1. I also think that it might have been... I'm interested to talk to you about it when we get to questions, as someone who wasn't as familiar with the video game.
Not at all.
So yeah, it's a 2023 series, season 1, based on the 2013 video game, and then there's a sequel, and also some kind of like prequel that references to sort of pop up in this episode. I know that to be true. Created by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. Neil Druckmann, who worked on the video game in the first place. So
created the video game, yeah.
Created the video game, writer, director, all of that. And very involved in the creation of the show, one of the showrunners, in fact. So I think that's really interesting that he's got such involvement.
That to me is what made this probably work as well as it did. Because as we spoke about when we did Fallout, there are very few adaptations of video games that are seen as like resoundingly successful, and Fallout and Last of Us are really the main two.
Kind of just these two.
Yeah. And so, yeah, Neil Druckmann was like, he wrote some of the episodes, co-directed some of them. Like I don't know if he wrote some of the episodes, but he co-directed and directed some of them. He was extremely involved in the whole process.
Yeah, Neil co-wrote the pilot or the first episode, When You're Lost in the Darkness, that we watched. He also wrote Left Behind, which is the third to last episode. And then he and Craig co-wrote Look for the Light, which is the season finale.
This just kind of speaks to their little bond, which is so cute when you watch them in interviews together. Mm-hmm. apparently they were fans of each other's work ahead of time. Craig Mazin played the game, and Neil Druckmann saw Chernobyl. Did you watch Chernobyl, the HBO series?
I haven't watched it, but I know that was the thing that made him feel like somebody could make his game work specifically as a show, right? I think they tried to figure out how it would work as a movie and just couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, and so he watched Chernobyl and became a pretty big fan of Craig Mazin's work, and Mazin was already a fan of his work, and it was just sort of this like they had a person in common who basically was like, you guys would be best friends, like if you ever met.
Did you listen to the first episode of the Last of Us podcast?
Of course I did. I actually listened to that podcast while the show was on. I went back and re-listened. Yeah,
I listened to just that episode mostly because it's hosted by. So I know I've said a few times I'm not a huge gamer, but there are certain games that I love. And Troy Baker, who hosts the podcast because he voices Joel, has also done voices on some video games that I really love, and he's in my like. Maybe my favorite video game, if you don't count the Zelda series, or tied with, is the Persona series, and he's a character in my favorite installment of that series. And so I love Troy Baker. And so when I saw that he hosted, I was like, all right, well, we'll give it a listen.
I wasn't familiar with him before that, but I did listen to that podcast while the show was on. Just, I think because when that show was airing, Pedro Pascal became like the internet's darling. And so it just started popping up on like my YouTube feed. It was like, you might be interested in watching Pedro Pascal be charming. And I was like, I am.
I am, in fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Troy Baker is like a super famous. I mentioned Persona, but like he's the lead in this. He is in, I think he's the lead in BioShock, and he's voice actor in video games like Saints Row, The Last of Us, Lego Batman. I mean, like literally, he's just everybody's go-to guy and has been forever. So Pedro had big shoes to fill, is what I'm saying.
They all did. I mean, like that's the thing about this game is that it's such a like obviously beloved, but also like the characters are so specific and so well known and loved by the players of the game that I mean, it would have been tough for anyone to do this job. But the thing that I thought was really sweet was early in the pre-production, Neil and Craig agreed that if the show was successful, they would get matching tattoos of Ellie's switchblade.
That's very cute. Did they do it?
They did it. Mazin got his in February and Neil got his in March of 2023.
It's so funny.
That's so cute. I love the matching tattoos.
Who got it second?
Neil.
It would be so funny if he just never did it.
I know. Just have Craig do it. All that to say, I do love their friendship. I feel like we talked last week about how some of these series that have female leads or female co-leads still feel very male-driven because they're written and directed by men. And that is the case here. But I do think that, and we didn't really see it in this first episode, but there's a lot of sort of queerness and sensitivity that shows up in various parts of the show later on. And I think that goes to, like, a lot has been said about the toxic masculinity in the video game world. And Neil Druckmann is one of the men who has, like, spoken out against it and who has kind of made a point to make his games more diverse and more, like, female-led and more queer and all of that. And he's very outspoken about it as someone who's very successful in that world. And so I think that that's probably a big part of it.
That's interesting and encouraging to hear. And I do think that the women that we meet in this pilot all feel like, you know, three-dimensional and
yeah, for the most part, totally.
Like,
and they continue to be. I think, like, he said specifically, he was presented with an award at the 2014 Game Developers Choice Awards, and he says that he cited Anita Sarkeesian as an influence, and said that he realized he had regularly been writing primarily about white, straight Christian male characters, and he was then prompted to address that and change it, which is, it just goes to show that, like, you don't have to be perfect from day one. You just have to be willing to hear people. So I appreciated that about him. And Craig Mazin just seems like a mensch. He's just such a sweetie pie in every interview. I love him very much. He also is one of the hosts of the Script Notes podcast, which I did not realize. That's a very popular podcast.
Oh, wait. I think that's been around forever, right?
It's been around forever. 2011.
Oh my God. I don't listen to it anymore, but I used to listen to it a lot when it first.
Him and John August began Script Notes, a weekly podcast on the craft of screenwriting in the U.S. That's him.
That's so funny. I loved that podcast. I haven't listened to it, like I said, in years, but you know what's funny? This is a perfect segue. I'm looking at it now. And the episode that came out last May 28th is The Power of the Cold Open. And I think that's a great way to kick off our recap of The Last of Us.
Look at your segue there. Oh, that's so professional.
Wow, wow, wow.
So, yes, we should talk about that because I got a text from you yesterday that, not to out you, was one of the funnier things that has happened on this podcast.
I think what happened was I was watching. I mean, I know what happened was I was watching.
Yeah, what happened?
I was watching the series on my housemate's account.
Oh.
And so it just picked up. I pay for my own streaming accounts as well, but on the shared home TV, we were just logged into theirs. Thank you. And,
because wait, I have to read this. So I got a text from you that said, well, this opening scene is a lot. That counts for every single episode of this show. Mm-hmm. So I had no clue, right? Mm-hmm. Every opening scene of the show was a lot. And then you said, oh, but that is real ASL. And I'm kind of like, I don't remember. But maybe like in that opening scene of the talk show,
there was an interpreter.
There was an interpreter.
I
was just like,
progressive accessibility in 1968.
We all know how bad my memory is. I was like, maybe I forgot. And then you texted me Melanie with multiple exclamation points. And I was like, wait a minute.
I was so happy to see her.
I was like, wait a minute. Melanie Linsky is not in the pilot.
Yeah, no, she's not.
And I said that and you said, uh-oh. Because you were not watching the pilot.
No, I wasn't.
You were watching like what, episode 6 or 7?
I have no idea. I stopped immediately. I mean, I didn't make it. That's as far as I made it in. I thought, and then we were going to flash back to Pedro Pascal.
Right. Yeah, no, Melanie Linsky shows up much later in the show. So thankfully we caught it and we're not talking about 2 different episodes right now.
That's so funny.
Oh, God.
No, but this opening is... Do you want my thoughts on it first? How do we want to...
Yeah, why don't you just tell me what you thought? Because you're the one that hadn't seen it, so...
My understanding of The Last of Us show, based on what I know about the video game, what I'd heard is that it was really dark, pretty bleak, you know, with moments of warmth and whatever, specifically because of Joel and Ellie's relationship.
Correct.
And then it opened with this really kind of stylized, almost silly. They're joking, like people are laughing. The characters are like capital C characters, I think, in a way where I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be a little lighter, you know, like maybe this is kind of setting the tone that I wasn't expecting. And I think it's cool. I think it's smart the way they did it to have it sort of percolating in the background without, like, they could have shown, I don't know what, they could have done it differently, but I think that's smart that we've got a history of it. We know it's coming. It's on the horizon, all of that. They talked about it in that podcast, and I don't want our podcast to just be a rehash of their podcast, but their original idea was more of like a Planet Earth style
exactly
video. And I think that could have been interesting and tonally probably would have worked better if all you're concerned with is tone. That makes way more sense. And they kind of do a version of it in the opening credits, sort of.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the opening credits are like, you know, a creepy version of the time lapses from the Fantastic Fungi documentary I told you to watch last week.
Exactly.
Yeah, they kind of based this on like a Dick Cavett show style talk show format. This was not the original plan, like you said. I do like the fact that this sets up the actual scientific basis for the ideas in the show, because they say, like, they talk about how the parasitic fungi that attack ants and how it like changes their behavior and they cannibalize each other, which is all true.
It's also, here's a question I had. Is that something everybody already knows just culturally, or is that something I know because I was on Tumblr and Tumblr was obsessed with it? And also, I learned a lot weirdly about mushrooms in grad school. So as an English major, because of how they communicate and provide communication.
Yeah. I feel like I can't answer that question because I have a similarly odd niche pop culture ingestion of information to you.
Right.
Like, I didn't know this from Tumblr, but I know this from weird niche podcasts and like random rabbit holes I've gone down for my work. Like, I knew that there were...
But it's not like the mitochondria is a powerhouse of the cell. We all know that.
No,
like,
I don't think it's like that.
This is probably new, horrifying information.
Right.
Where I have just been consistently horrified and obsessed and fascinated by mushrooms forever.
Like, I know that you're not a bug person, but I'm like, I wouldn't want to live there, but I'm weirdly jealous of the people watching the cicada invasion in the Midwest right now. Your face is great right now. I would want to be there for like a day just to see it, wearing like a full beekeeper's outfit. But like,
you know what that would feel like, smacking against your beekeeper's outfit?
I do, because I mean, well, you grew up in Jersey. Like, we don't have that crazy number of cicadas emerging all at once.
I stay inside. My biggest fear is when you see... I just one is enough for me.
So I used to pick the little shells off the trees when I was a kid.
With your hands?
Yes, with my hands.
No,
I used to pick up rocks and look at the bugs under them.
This is where, like...
I know.
You know what this is? This is North Jersey nonsense, where it's like it's exotic for you, and I'm like, this is just... I
had one tree in my backyard.
Exactly. So
it was like 6 feet tall, and I used to climb it. Did I ever tell you the story that my mom told me that she found me once up in the tree with my typewriter?
Yes.
It's ridiculous. It's like...
So Harriet the Spy of you. That's
what I was doing. I think I was spying on my neighbors because I'd read Harriet the Spy. Anyway, all that to say, the thing that they say that's like the dun 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 is like the 94... They can't live above 94 degrees. The human body is...
What if?
What if the world gets warmer? Oh my God. That couldn't happen.
It really gives the show stakes in the same way that Station 11 does, where it's like there are like the Fallout post-apocalypse, whatever, feels out of reach. It would take a lot of work for us to orchestrate that kind of world, right? Like, Station 11, global pandemic, flu-like. Yep, totally. This now, the way they set it up, where they're like, all it would need is for the world to get a little warmer and for these
them
organisms to adapt to it. And it's like,
Which we know happens.
Am I waiting? Like, is that true? Is that true that that's all it would take? And then, because I feel like maybe that's true.
It could be.
And if that's true and that's what happens, is that what would happen? Feels like yes. I don't know.
According to the people that made this show, that is what would happen. But I don't know if they're actually correct. But I think one thing that, just to piggyback on that, the way that the world looks in something like Silo or Fallout, where there's like this really planned architecture and like all of these ways to survive this apocalypse that feel like some greater hand has just kind of plopped them in. This, to me, like you said, feels more like Station 11, where it's like the army has erected some sort of janky-ass walled city where, like, things kind of work but kind of don't. And, you know, it's a mess and it's dirty. And, like, that feels that sort of half-assed, rigged, like, quarantine zone feels more like what would actually happen than some like silo with a farm on one level and like, you know.
Yeah. And it's funny. This is something that I only really started thinking about with The Last of Us, because I'm like, Last of Us and Station 11 are very similar in terms of inciting incident is something not technically man-made that takes over very quickly.
Very quickly, yeah.
And then humanity has to respond.
Right.
And
a huge chunk of the population's eliminated.
Right. And Last of Us is so violent and dark. And Station 11 is, even in its darkest moments, isn't. There is violence for sure. But it just is, it feels so different. And I'm so glad that I had Station 11 first.
Yeah.
Because it makes this feel so much more digestible, because I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be this way. I know it's different because they're all being puppeted around by mushrooms, because mushrooms love. I'm just going to call all fungus mushrooms for this episode. Yeah. I know that I'm being dismissive. Apologies to the cordyceps.
If we're being specific. Yes.
Exactly. Apologies to the cordyceps. But
they'll get their revenge on you. Don't worry when they take over.
But it just is like, I just need a little bit of light. And we get it in Station 11, thank God. Then we don't. So far, we haven't gotten it here.
Yeah. And it does come, mostly through relationships, not just Bill and Frank, which I talk about endlessly, but through all sorts of other relationships. It is overall a much darker tone, in terms of the bleakness that is consistently there.
And I think a big part of that is knowing what, I almost said Druckmann, which is the last name of a character in one of my favorite episodes of The X-Files, that Druckmann has said about what he wanted to do in the story he wanted to explore, which is so different from the angle, love is healing, it tends to be, and like what we do for love is really beautiful. And he has said, and not just in that podcast, I've heard him say this before, that he wanted to look at a story that looks at almost the sort of danger of loving someone or something unconditionally. And he's exploring that through the parent-child relationship. And we hear about stuff in real life all the time, like the lengths people will go to protect their children. Yeah. They are not necessarily the most logical. And it's not. And it's funny thinking about the cordyceps puppeting people around without letting them think logically and making the best choices. But like we have versions of that in our own lives. And so the difference between the parent-child relationship in this
Station 11
versus Station 11, and we have a few parent kind of child relationships. Like I thought of, here we go, we're 26 minutes in, we're kind of all over the place. But one of the things I thought about, so cold open happens. Yeah. And then go ahead.
Yes. I did want to mention real quick before we get fully into the pilot that something that I thought was really interesting, which I think you may have come across. When they were putting this together originally, this was 2 episodes.
Yes.
Did you come across this?
I did.
Yes. So when I put this on to rewatch the other day, I texted you and was like, oh God, I forgot. It's like an hour and a half. It's a movie, right? But originally it was 2 episodes. And the first one ended basically right when we meet Ellie or right before. It ended right in the time jump. Like it jumped 20 years later and then kind of ended. And the network was like, this is all darkness. Like, we don't know that people are going to want to come back. And so talking about how they had to balance that somehow with these relationships, I think they had to give a little bit more of the Ellie, Joel, Tess, connection to get people to want to come back. So I just wanted to mention that.
I think is probably a good move.
Oh, so do I. And so they think that too now, looking back. But yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, please, that's helpful to know. So we get that cold open. So we know that's simmering under the surface the whole time. And then we meet single father Joel and his daughter Sarah. And man, did you
R.I.P. Sarah.
R.I.P. Sarah. Immediately Kirsten and Jeevan vibes.
Of course. That's the thing. That's what I mean when I say, I could not love a show more that's about, a reluctant, gruff dad figure who clearly, loves the kid, but also has other things that he's dealing with and that just can't handle all of it. And a really smart kid.
Smart. Again, precocious, but not in a way that is annoying. She's great. I think Ellie's great, too, but,
she knows where Jakarta is.
Exactly.
She's on top of it.
He talks to her like an actual person. And
yes.
She's a little more independent than she probably should have to be.
Yes,
just
absolutely.
A lot of...
She's making him breakfast,
Yeah, a little bit of the like, I don't know if parentified is the exact right word in this case.
I think it is.
But yeah, she's,
She's making him drink orange juice because otherwise he won't have any like vitamins in his life.
He promises he's going to get a cake for his birthday because it's important to her that he celebrates his birthday. There's a lot of that.
Exactly.
We don't find out anything in this about her mother, right?
No.
Okay.
No. There's some pictures, I think, that you flash by really quickly when you go through her room of
She's
a mother.
Big Beyonce fan and also a big The Clash fan. And I'm not saying those two things can't exist together, but one of my favorite things is to look at the posters people put in teenagers' rooms in movies and TV shows because they will put anything up. It could be any old band.
But a point that I want to make about that actually is that the set of Joel's house, including Sarah's room, is taken exactly
from the video game.
Like to the point where Neil Druckmann got emotional when he first saw it because it was so perfect.
It's like seeing it come to life.
Yeah.
I've played actually through the intro of the video game twice because I've wanted to play this game, and both times I was like, I need to take a minute, and then just couldn't go back to it because it is almost exactly what happens here. Almost. Yeah. You get way more of the neighbors. They spend a lot more time sort of developing this relationship and letting us get to know who Joel is, which makes sense and is really necessary, I think.
Well, because in the game you're spending so much time doing and not like as one of the characters that I feel like some of the like you need to fill in more of that character detail because you're not going to have like you're not being told a story the entire time. You're actually in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they get to do some really cool, interesting stuff, I think, with this intro. Like Sarah's little trip to, that she fixes watching the game, but her actual trip to go do it. And thinking of Twin Peaks and some of the weird stuff that happens in the background, like when they find out that Laura Palmer's died in the scene and then the student goes running by in the background screaming. I thought of that when you see the fire trucks and stuff go rushing behind. All of the stuff that's happening in the background that you're kind of privy to because you had that cold open of like, this is probably related.
And then the wife comes out and is like, we're closing right now.
And you should go home.
What's funny is, like, I know this isn't a pandemic show necessarily. I mean, it came out during the pandemic, but it's not about a pandemic. It felt moment of like everything has to shut down right now.
And we're not totally sure what's going on, but
like I was at a conference the weekend before everything shut down, and like we already had that eerie feeling on the plane on the way back. Like, wait, something we should we not be on this plane? Should we? What's happening? Are we gonna get stuck in Houston? Like, and then we got back, and it was everything. All the decisions happened so fast to shut down work, to go home. Like, no way to plan for any of it. Like. It happened over the course of maybe a week to us, but it was quick.
Yeah.
And that's what that fire truck going by felt like.
My students left for spring break and then we just didn't come back. Like we left for spring break with plans to return and didn't.
See, we left for spring break, came back, and then we came back to 3 days of classes.
Oh, wow.
And then, or wait, no. I'm wrong. It was right before spring break. We went home for spring break and didn't come back also.
Okay, yeah.
But it felt like everything happened so incredibly quickly. And there was that eerie feeling of like, there's stuff going on just outside of our periphery.
Yeah.
That is like going to affect us immediately. Totally. Yeah, that her on the bus to town on her own. You're like, oh no. Oh no, go home.
Please.
Because when I first watched this, I didn't know the story at all. So I didn't know what was going to happen next. I just knew that it was bad.
Which I think is really cool. They do a really good job of seeding that for you. But to step back just a little bit, so it's Joel's birthday, obviously. We see they have a relationship with the neighbors, with Nana and
Connie.
Nana and Connie and
the guy.
And Sarah goes over and
so many classic horror movie signs in this one scene. The dog's reaction at the end of the scene.
Oh, and his name is Mercy. Yeah, the dog reacting to Nana, but they make a really big point of just how she's like catatonic.
She's catatonic. Yeah, she's like non-responsive.
They're like jamming like undercooked biscuits into her mouth, and she can't even eat a biscuit. And when Connie's feeding her Jello, she says, "I don't even know why I talked to her. She's totally deaf."
Yep.
And they're making raisin cookies, which is really the most horrific part
I know.
of the whole scene.
Agreed.
And the two of them, Connie and Sarah, are talking, and you see Nana in the background, out of focus.
Yep.
Like shifting her hands and throwing her head back in the most. It's true, genuinely scary.
And then to me, the worst of that, her mouth.
Yeah, when she's like throwing her head back and her mouth is opening.
I can't.
And like it just looks, and because it's again out of focus and it's background in the scene, you don't actually hear anything, and you can't totally see what it just looks scary and bad.
Yeah, because she hasn't moved this whole time.
No, not at all. And the movements aren't natural. I mean, it looks like somebody getting their bearings, moving a puppet around of like, well, when I move this hand, it kind of goes this way, and this is how I make the head and mouth move.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I didn't know the games going into this, so I didn't. I mean, obviously, I recognize that as like really bad.
Yeah, this scene doesn't exist in the game at all. This is wholly new for the show, and it is.
But that movement is so specifically taken from the clickers, as they're called in the game. Right. Like that spasmodic, like jerky.
Awful. So scary.
Yeah. So she finally leaves. She borrows the DVD and goes home. That's where the dog is. Mercy, staring at the lady. Always listen to the dogs, guys.
Always listen to the dogs.
If a dog doesn't like someone, it's a sign.
100% true.
I know it is. I always judge people by how animals look at them.
Yeah, that's not even just a movie trope. That's like ripped from the headlines real.
No, I know. And like, little peek behind the curtain, when I finally went to your house and met your dog, I was like, that dog better fucking like me, because otherwise I think our podcast is over.
That's 100% correct.
Yeah. Thankfully, animals love me.
Yeah. I mean, the real win is that you won the cat over.
Hell yeah, I did.
Yeah. I mean, it took 3 days, but it happened.
It worked, though.
Yeah.
He approached me.
Yeah. He doesn't usually,
me.
So.
Yeah.
So, as far as we know, no cordyceps in Jody's brain. Although Toby may, actually, that might be
why he liked me.
Yeah. He sensed that there's something wrong with you the way there's something wrong with him.
Right.
It's possible.
That's fair.
We forgot to mention Joel has a fuck-up brother, Tommy.
Yes.
Who he's like clearly kind of been dragging through life, making him.
But we also get the little clue from the bumper sticker that he's an Iraq war vet and probably is dealing with some shit also from that.
Correct.
But yeah, so as she's going home, we see another version of the fire trucks, right? We see the combat planes kind of flying overhead.
That escalation is also very smart. Yeah. It's an obvious escalation, but it is a good way to show us how quickly this is progressing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we have sort of this very fast escalation also at the house, right? Like Joel comes home, it's 10 o'clock, he forgot the cake, bad dad, whatever. She's sort of humorous about it. She gives him the watch, they watch a movie, she falls asleep, and then Tommy calls from jail.
Right. Because some guy went nuts.
Went crazy in a bar.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So Joel has to go pick him up. He leaves Sarah at home. He puts her in bed, she's asleep, and he goes to get Tommy. And the next thing we see, it's like 2 a.m. and she wakes up because of the helicopters. It's like, yikes.
And then she, makes her way downstairs to see what's going on. And then this is where Mercy comes back. Mercy trying to get into the house looks so human.
I know.
This dog's acting is so good because he's
it's a great dog actor.
Yeah, he really is like, let me in.
Yeah.
He knows if there's some shit going on.
And she tries to take him home. He's like, no, thank you.
Listen to the
I
dog.
came here for a reason. I know,
there's
right?
No way.
I, in my notes, wrote in all caps, why is she going in?
Exactly.
Just so innocent. I mean, I think that's part of the point, right? Is the comparison between Sarah and Ellie is so dramatic. Like Ellie's so like spiky and hard-worn and skeptical and distrustful.
And unflinching.
Yeah. And Sarah's like a kid before anything bad has happened, really.
Exactly.
I mean, bad things have happened, but before the end of the world kind of happens.
She's living in a totally different world. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she goes back to the house.
This is where I was like, I forgot how gross this whole thing is.
So much blood.
So much blood. And then, like, she sees the guy dead.
Right. Well, he's still alive.
Right.
But he is bleeding out.
He's not going to be for much longer.
And then she turns to the side, and that's where she sees Nana feeding on Connie. And it, like, they couldn't make it more disgusting. She's like, it's like hair and all.
Yeah.
I guess this is the part that I'm like, would the fungus have to make us all eat each other? Could they, like...
So originally, I think in the game it's spread by spores. Mm-hmm. But because of COVID and the airborne pandemic thing that we all went through, they thought about how it could be transmitted that wouldn't be a direct trigger / reference to people that had just gone through an airborne pandemic.
That's really interesting. I missed that. I didn't come across that anywhere. That's very thoughtful of them. It's funny because it isn't is a zombie story, but in a way that is like a new take on the zombie story. But that spread of it having to be a contact or a bite makes it so much more of makes it more of a traditional zombie story in that way too. Right. That's interesting.
And I think, like, they talked in one of the interviews I watched about how it is spread through biting, but also they thought about how the mycelium network works and how once it gets in, it spreads that way. Mm-hmm. And so even though a bite or an injury, breaking the skin thing is sort of how it happens, I think they try to balance, like, not having it mimic the airborne pandemic we just went through, but also not having it be...
You still need the mushrooms to...
Yeah, not having it be exactly a zombie situation.
Mm-hmm. Smart.
Because they're not zombies, but because of that change, it is more connected to the zombie stories. But...
Joel and Tommy return, right? She runs out of the house.
So she runs out of the house, and they're coming home right at the same time. Perfect and Nana is kind of like twitchingly chasing her out of the house.
Man, it's so it's a cheat that it is scarier because she's old. Like, yeah, it is. It says a lot about our own relationship with age and mortality. That what makes this even scarier is not just the fact that she couldn't move at all before, and now she's moving. But, like, it's also the fact that it just is scary to see an older person
move
quickly and violently. And
well, it's also, there's a weird, like, in some ways it's destroying her, but it also kind of weirdly healed her for a minute. Like, she's out of the chair running.
Kind of cool.
You know?
It's kind of like, all right, Anna, go for it. You do you.
But they put her. Joel hits her in the head with a wrench.
He puts her down quick.
Yeah. And you see the horror in her eyes, in Sarah's eyes when she does that, he does that.
Which is a reasonable reaction, I think. I also think there's something really, I thought, we're talking about how quickly this escalated, and whatever Tommy and Joel encountered on their way out, they already have, like... They know. They have plans, they have a system, they, like, when I think Tommy questions Joel what to do about Nana, and it's like, clearly this is not the first time they've had to make a decision on whether or not to put somebody down.
I connected it also to Tommy's, like, war background too, that he's, like, there with the gun ready to go. But yeah, they definitely saw some shit getting back home. I also wanted to mention, this is not new information, but Sarah's reaction when he kills Nana is purposely in the episode kind of bookended with Ellie's reaction to him killing the guard.
Really kind of overt and purposefully obvious mirror moments, mirror images from Joel now to Joel 20 years in the future. And
then Sarah and Ellie as comparisons as well.
Right, exactly. And so this is one of those. So that's a good moment to put a pin in.
And then we have the truck chase.
This
is filmed really interestingly. They had basically a stunt driver on top of the car, and then the DP was in the back seat. They had a 360 camera coming in through the roof, so you could feel like you were in the truck with them the entire time. And it really feels like that. You feel trapped in there with them during that chase scene.
Yeah. There was a stunt driver on top of the car?
Yeah.
Like
driving the car from above it. Yeah.
Like Mr. Bean style?
I guess. Yeah. They have a little pod on top of the car where the driver is so that they don't have to actually be driving the car.
Are you kidding
Yeah. There's
me?
a picture of it. I just was watching a behind the scenes.
Does it look like this?
Kind of. More of a metal cage than a recliner.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's driving the car Mr. Bean style, camera inside. That's very cool because filming inside cars I know is always a challenge, and that's a really very cool way to deal with that because it is done really well and it is really stressful.
Yes. Yeah, because you see things as like they're getting cut off at every turn. Like they keep trying to go a different way, and that way is blocked by the army or by a bunch of people running away from other people eating other people, and it's just full on chaos. Planes are flying in, then a plane crashes behind them, of course, which reminded me of Station 11.
Shows love to show a plane going down as a way to indicate how bad things have gotten.
Right.
And that is horrifying to think about. Station 11, it's bad enough, a bunch of people sick, dying on the tarmac. There's also the one that crashes into Navy Pier. But what was going on that flight? Is it just that who knows?
Yeah, well, I think it's either that people are eating each other and the pilot is infected with mushroom spores, or the government shot them down or told them to crash.
Right. Could be any of those, right?
Yeah. But the plane crash, I think, is what causes the car to flip because, shrapnel is, flung at the car.
Yeah. They keep putting Sarah into moments where you think she's going to die only to, let her survive. And the way that shrapnel comes through, it looks like that might be it for Sarah.
Right.
But she's
hurt her ankle for the moment.
And then he scoops her up like a good dad. And this is the second image that you need to put a little pin in, is him carrying his daughter and her, feet kind of dangling over his arm. And he's protecting her.
Yep.
And they are trying to run somewhere, anywhere at this point. And they encounter a guy, military. And this scene is tough.
It is. And it's interesting because, again, it's a mirror of later scenes where this is the beginning of something horrible and the soldier hesitates, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's getting orders over his radio to kill them.
Right. Very obviously.
Yeah. And he's hesitating. Mm-hmm. He's like, really?
And I think in the video game, he actually says, but it's just a kid, or he's got a kid. And they don't say that directly because you don't need it, but that's where the real hesitation is. And then
he shoots him.
He shoots, yeah.
And this scene, Craig Mazin has talked about how he really wanted this to be one of the scenes that people who played the game really recognize as being true to the gameplay experience. They had a lot of liberty that they took with lots of things, as we've talked about already, but this was one of the scenes he felt like he really wanted to draw from the game experience.
And we watch Sarah die, and
the way that Tommy says Joel in that moment, he knows before Joel does that it's over.
Yeah. It's
some great
really
acting by Pedro Pascal.
Everybody's great in it. He's the most distraught anybody's ever been, and he's rocking his child's
dead child.
Oh, man.
I know. It's rough. And then we just smash to 20 years later.
And that's when Kirsten is reading.
Yeah. Yes.
The 20 years later flash is so different. It's like the sun is bright and there's greenery and she's reading Shakespeare and running around. And then Joel is
kind
instead
of like that because they smash cut to the post-apocalyptic, I was thinking maybe it was the Fens, but then that view of Boston, I was like, where is that from? I went to grad school in Boston, so I was like, But there's a kid walking through the forest looking. At first, we're like, is that kid a clicker or whatever?
Right,
because the way that they're walking, they just kind of look dazed. And we see the wall of the QZ as they approach it. Which I was looking at some post-production or some production behind the scenes stuff, and they actually built that concrete wall that people could stand on it. Like, a lot of this has, I mean, the whole show has tons of VFX added.
Right, of course.
But they did so much practically to form the base for it.
We haven't talked about the worst thing that happens up to this point. When you see Nana's mouth after she is feeding on and all the hair comes out, and then you see this, like, what do you call it?
The tendrils.
The tendrils. And her mouth is so full of them, and they're all moving.
I watched how they did that in practical effects and even watching it as a practical effect without the additional is horrifying.
That's a practical effect?
That is literally like bits of silicone in a mouth implant. It's awful.
I can't believe that's a practical effect.
I mean, it's added to, obviously.
Right,
after
but
the
it's
fact.
not just somebody.
Nope. People have shit in their mouths in this show. It's horrifying.
Maybe that's why it feels so.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like having trouble now, like forcing my words out around it because I can feel it.
It is the thing I have the most trouble with in this whole show.
It's awful. It's awful.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And that is like, you probably don't want to watch it, but the behind the scenes thing I watched shows how they did that practically and then added to it with VFX. And it is yikes.
It's here in my mouth right now. I don't need
I know,
to watch
it's awful.
it. This is
it's
what
awful. Let's move on. Let's move on.
I just didn't want to. We had to talk about that because it is really bad.
It is.
And then so where were we? Kid.
The kid's walking up to the QZ. They let him in. At first, you think they're going to actually take care of him.
Yeah, and they scan him, and it's also really smart. Like, it's in the background, and you see it turn red.
Yeah.
We know red bad.
Yeah. Generally speaking, yes.
Yeah. Thinking about our signage in Fallout, when they're questioning this little boy and testing him, we see the sign that's the, like, 24 hours to full infection, and it's got the little images, and it's so interesting to see what over the course of 20 years kind of what becomes routine. And that
I mean, over the course of a multiple year pandemic, what became routine, all of those like 6 feet apart signs.
Exactly.
And the like period of time where people were sharing memes of animals with masks on improperly. Like there was like a meme of a dog wearing a mask over its eyes. Like, it's just
how quickly we let it all become part of our day to day. Yeah. And so I thought that was something. Like, they had those signs made and printed up somewhere, you know?
Yeah. And the difference in the signage, like vibes and design sensibility between something like Fallout, where it's very like cheerful 1950s, the world has ended, but, you know, be useful and happy.
Exactly.
Versus, we're going to shoot you if you show these signs, so be careful.
Well, and sort of knowing a little bit more, I won't say... it's a bit of a Fallout spoiler, but knowing what we do about how the Fallout world came to be versus how this world came to be, as far as we know. I don't know if there's more to learn about The Last of Us origination, but it makes a kind of sense that it's a little more, there's a little more of like a facade to it, and there's like a little more hiding underneath of even just looking at the signage. And the way that, like, when there's blood in the vault gets on the sign, they just replace it with a nice new shiny one. But this 24 hours to full infection sign has been there probably... It's the first and only one, and they've just let it get like gross and grimy.
Right. Totally.
So then his thing flashes red, but then it's like the of Mice and Men, Tell Me About the Rabbits. The person who's talking to the kid is like, what if I told you, you know, we're going to give you some medicine, and then you're going to get better, and we're going to give you your favorite food and all the toys and blah, 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 and like talks to him very sweetly. And then we know that this kid's not going to make it. I was kind of... I thought if your business is killing people no matter what, and that includes children, that they were kind of as kind as they could be to that child. I was kind of moved by. I was like, okay, there's a little bit of humanity here. Especially 20 years in, you could see them... Because who cares? This kid's going to be dead in 10 seconds either way. Yeah. So you're doing this kid a kindness, but To what end?
But then we see in that very next scene, like, the very next scene is Joel 20 years later looking much more haggard.
I thought you were going to say much hotter. Correct.
He's also, I mean, he's hot throughout this whole thing, but yes, he's very hot.
This was the first scene where I was like, all right.
Yeah. Yeah. But they're literally burning dead bodies.
Yeah.
And we see that kid's body come through.
He scoops that kid up and tosses, again, in an obvious intentional parallel to go from, holding your child's dead body to being able to toss another child's dead body into a pit without.
Very easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're seeing how, like you said, how kind the process still can be, but then the ultimate result,
right?
Which is just a pile of bodies,
right? And they have to burn them, obviously, because mushrooms want to mush. They're not. You really got to make sure.
This just weirdly reminded me. This is such a off topic, but I was doing some work share stuff at a residency once, and my job was to help control the wisteria that was eating the house I was living in. And I was told that you can't just throw it in a compost pile because it will literally even if you've pulled it out of the ground and it has no roots left, it will branch out again underground and continue to grow.
Fascinating, man. The way stuff wants to continue to grow.
You have to burn it. You cannot put it in a compost pile or it will just grow again. Anyway, I don't know where this needs to go, somewhere in the episode, and so it might as well go here. There's a old Tumblr post that I love so much about mushrooms. It is somebody wrote, this is Hyperactive Hedgehog, I think is the original, but maybe not. Classic.
I'm studying
Tumblr
biotech.
name.
Exactly, yeah. I'm studying biotech, and every time someone brings up mushrooms, our current professor will look either extremely excited or pained and go, listen, mushrooms are neither plants nor animals, nor something in between. They elude all attempts to categorize them. We do not know what they are. Some are immortal. Some produce life-saving substances. Some are so closely related to humans that eating them may cause an allergic reaction against your own body. I cannot teach you about the mushrooms.
Oh my God.
I think about that on a weekly basis.
That's perfect. I mean, that's where we get psychedelics from, for fuck's sake.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, yeah. I do like that we think we're seeing Joel completely, fully shut down, no feelings left whatsoever. But then he does ask for a different assignment the next time, which shows you that it's still, he would rather work in the sewer than do this for a long period of time. Right.
He's changed because he's had to protect himself and he's closed off, but it's not that he's actually fully desensitized.
Yeah. Yeah. We also see he has a relationship with this soldier that he is moving goods and selling drugs to. And so we see that Joel has found a way to make his life a little bit outside the norm of just a drone person walking through life. He has some extrajudicial things happening, which is going to be important.
Right.
We find out about the Fireflies, which is this rebel group that's trying to overthrow Fedra, which is our government agency. And we also find out that Joel wants a vehicle. We don't know why yet.
Right, but badly. And he's one of the reasons he's willing to take the worst jobs is because they pay quote unquote better.
Right, exactly.
We also get a public execution in this scene that I thought was kind of rough, and also that the way everybody just kind of gathers unblinkingly to watch it.
Yeah, it definitely shows the numbness to the stakes of everything that people have, and the sort of performance of authority that Fedra has to do to keep people in line.
Right. Yeah.
But then we go to Tess, who apparently has no respect for authority. I fucking love Tess.
Tess rules. This dynamic, her and Robert, when I was when you're kind of figuring out what's going on there, is so fun and weird, where they're both kind of, he's got her, she's stuck there until he lets her go, but she sort of has the upper hand.
Yeah.
Where he's the only reason he doesn't want to let her go is because he's afraid of Joel, which is so interesting because we know that Joel is hardened now, whatever, and blah, blah, blah. But we also know Joel to be a really sweet.
Yeah, not anymore.
and in a world like this, to be afraid of anyone more than anyone else says a lot too. Like, what?
Yeah, totally.
What do we know about Joel? Like, what don't we know about Joel that Robert does?
Yeah. Yeah. And I had forgotten how dramatically this scene ends. Like, they've decided, I think, that he's going to let her go. They're good. He sold the battery to someone else that he was supposed to sell to her, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden the building blows up.
Yeah.
Like, very dramatically.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff going on, and this is obvious to say, and I'm not breaking any ground and whatever and blah, blah, blah. But what all of these shows end up being is like, this is a show about a catastrophic event that happens, and they are continuously under the threat of that event and the cause of it, the cordyceps and whatever. Mm-hmm. But then also there are so many other threats that come up that have nothing to do with that. Like, for example, this, the cause of the building blowing up, the
fireflies,
the violence that happens between people living in this world that have nothing really to do with the...
Could you say that the people are the real virus?
Exactly, So,
yeah.
Again, like I said, that's nothing new, but it is really apparent in this show.
Yeah.
It's almost like any event could have caused this, and we would end up... Any catastrophic event, it didn't have to be, and we would end up here.
Definitely. And we also see that so after the building blows up, Tess gets apprehended by Fedra briefly and then let go, which seems like a pretty consistent occurrence. Mm-hmm. But then finally, we get to Firefly headquarters and we meet Ellie.
We meet Veronica.
Also Ellie.
She's so good.
She doesn't know her actual name yet. But she's so fucking funny. Mm-hmm. Like, you need that, like, angry, spiteful, sarcastic moment after all of the bleakness that you've seen.
She's got some real life in her. In a way that is really fun. And she doesn't want to do anything they say, but she does. She's just like, it's a very teenager thing to, like, have to show that she can push back but still go along with it.
Yeah.
Like when they tell her to count and then they make her count slowly and then she ends at 8. It's a 7, 8. Fuck you is really good. And then we learn that podcasts still exist.
Yes. There's a radio station that is passing messages back and forth through code. And this is where we find out why Joel needs the battery in the truck, because he needs to go find his brother who is out west in Wyoming, where I just was recently. It's really fucking far from Boston.
Yeah.
It's so far.
Yeah.
I drove there and it took a long time.
Right. And you didn't have... I
didn't have raiders and slavers chasing me.
Exactly. And, like, we don't know for sure that Tommy's in trouble. Joel just has a feeling. And Joel has been taking care of Tommy forever. And, like, making sure that Tommy's okay forever. And he's also, it seems, as far as we know, the only family Joel has.
And Tommy apparently has never taken more than a day to respond, and now it's been a few weeks, and he's kind of panicking.
Right.
We go back to the apartment. Lots of fun little, not fun, lots of subtle little signs of how bad and different things are. Like, he pushes, like, this dresser over, and he's got stuff hidden in the floorboards. Like, it feels like they just took up residence in some abandoned apartment, like everyone else has. He's looking at the map and seeing how far Wyoming is.
Fucking far.
Yeah. Drinking, taking pills, passing out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's coping kind of as best he can.
Yeah.
And then we see that he and Tess, who, again, we've already met, but know that they have some. But does she say his name, actually, in that scene? Do we know for sure that she's talking about Joel when we first meet her? And she says, like,
I don't think
I'll tell him. Yeah. So that's funny. I had forgotten that. I just watched this last night. But we then realized, because she, like, climbs into bed with Joel, that that's who she's probably talking about.
Yeah. And then the next morning, he sees her injuries. Mm-hmm. It's so funny to watch her manage him. Mm-hmm. Like, she is very carefully choosing her words so that she can make sure that he does what she wants him to do, and doesn't lose control of his emotions.
Right, which we know he has the capability of doing.
Clearly.
We see it. We see it
later.
Pretty soon.
Yeah.
But she does tell him the truth.
Yeah. She just does it very carefully.
Yeah. And they make a plan.
Right. They're going to go get the battery back. They're going to find Robert. Which it's funny. You can like, now that I've seen this a couple of times, you can see all the threads starting to converge at this point. Not those kinds of threads. Because we keep jumping back and forth between Firefly headquarters and Joel and Tess. And so, like, obviously we're going to end up meeting, but they're talking about moving Ellie west. And we're figuring out slowly why she's important. They haven't told us yet, but
yeah, she's clearly precious cargo.
Yes, absolutely. We have a brief interlude where Tess and Joel are trying to figure out where the battery is. We hop back to the Firefly building and we meet Marlene.
Who I really like.
Well, I'm sure you know this, but it's the same actor that played her in the video game, plays her in the TV show.
Oh, I actually didn't know that. That's very cool.
Yeah, she
I actually didn't play far enough into the game to meet Marlene. I only played that up through when Sarah dies.
I think she's the only one. Other people that have roles in the game show up in like bit parts, but not as playing the exact same character that they did in the show, especially not a main character. But she was like, I saw interviews with her where she was like, this is mine. I need this. I need this to be me again. Like, I am funny. Marlene. That's cool. She's great in it.
She's really good. Yeah, she's really likable.
Yeah.
She has a really, you don't have a fucking ear on your fucking head.
I know.
So
that
funny.
Line is great.
Yeah.
But she comes in and talks to Ellie and explains a little bit more about who Ellie is to Ellie. She's an orphan. She was put with Fedra by Marlene for some unknown reason. Ellie says, "You my fucking mom or something?"
She says, "Do I look like your mom?"
Yeah. And we get a mention of Riley here, and it's the only time we hear that name, but that will come back later on. And then this, I didn't catch this the first time I watched it, but they're interrupted by one of her people saying, "He's here."
Right.
And later on, I think we realized that was Robert bringing the battery to them.
Right. And we also, Marlene says, like, I'm going to tell you something, you need to listen very carefully. And then, of course, we don't get to see what that is.
Right. Exactly. The convergence is getting closer. We see Tess and Joel in that subway tunnel, which, I mean, we've talked about this as people from New Jersey whose, like, lives were ruled by Weird New Jersey and exploring abandoned shit as kids. Like, this rundown subway station, like,
I've never come across anything as horrifying as what they do, but that's where they find that body that's like
against the wall,
all mushroomed over, and it is so gross. Still not as bad as Nana's mouth, but
no, definitely not. But they're like climbing through the tunnels. They find, I mean, as someone who lived in Boston for a while, I love the references to specific like stations. Like they're at Haymarket and they like climb up this ladder and come out in the Firefly headquarters. But Robert's dead. Bunch of dead people in the hallway.
Something happened.
Yeah. This is where we get the line about Kim's ear. They see, so it's funny because they come out and then they see Kim and Marlene in the hallway and they recognize each other. And then Ellie just like launches herself out of a side room in the hallway to try to attack Joel.
Because she's got her own little knife. She rules.
I know. She
doesn't even know who he is.
Scene.
She's just like ready to.
Yep.
She's ready to throw down.
Stab him. Yeah. And then we get a bunch of exposition. You know, there's a team of Fireflies waiting for her. We'll give you what you need, the truck, the battery, etc. If you get her there, we can't right now because this one has no ear and I've been shot.
And he says like something like, I get everything I want before I hand her over. And she's like, done. And Ellie's like, that was fast.
Yeah.
Like, but that shows how, and I mean, Marlene even says, like, you're the most important thing. Nobody's going to compromise that. Joel will do anything.
Yeah. We get a little interlude while they're waiting for darkness back at the apartment. This is where we see Ellie trying to kind of needle Joel a little bit about the code and, you know, pointing out that she's smart.
Code.
Yeah. Yeah. The 80s are trouble. The 80s are bad news. He asks, like, are you some bigwig's daughter or something? And she's like, something like that.
Something like that.
Tess has apparently been out on a recon mission to figure out the best way to get them out. And once it's dark, they head out. They're like, it just feels dangerous. They're out in the streets at night. There's soldiers on tanks with guns. Well, there was a warning from that soldier
earlier to like stay off the streets. And there's also a sign somewhere that like curfew is 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. no matter what. So the fact that they're even out at night is a problem.
Yeah. They are clearly like tunneling underground to get to the other side of the fence. And when they come out of that concrete, Ellie just like stands up like an idiot and is like, wow, I'm outside. Like, you fucking moron.
God.
Duck down, man. Tess is like, it's so funny though to see the interactions between her and Tess in this moment. Like, she clearly like respects Tess's abilities and intelligence pretty quickly.
In a way that she doesn't with Joel.
Yeah. Yeah, she clearly knows that Tess is the smart one, or the one that's kind of in charge of everything. The soldier sees them. Same one that Joel. It's funny. It's a nice little bait and switch because you think, oh, because Joel has sold this guy drugs before, they have this existing relationship, that he's going to let them go. But the guy's like,
nope.
Yeah.
And then Joel lets the darkness take over. He's been here before.
Ellie stabs him in the leg.
That's right. Yeah,
which is delightful.
Yeah, you think maybe, like you said, it's a bait and switch. You think maybe he's gonna let her go, and it like it's not until Ellie stabs him that you're like, no, like
I know
it's definitely not going the way that we might hope it could.
She is wicked with that knife. She's scampering around.
She's been looking for someone to stab.
She's been trying. Yeah. But yeah, we do see Joel realizes this isn't going to go well, and he just glazes over and beats him to death. And that's that contrast. You see Ellie watching him with like fascination, not horror.
Yeah, she's grown up in a very different world than Sarah did.
Yeah. This is where we find out also that, because he has scanned her, the soldier has scanned Ellie, and we find out that she is infected, but also we also find out she's kind of not infected.
Yeah, that she was bit and is testing positive, but
it's been weeks and it hasn't progressed. It's just kind of like healed.
And I guess that raises a couple of questions, but yeah. So then, what else happens here?
That's pretty much the end of it. We see them kind of walking off in the darkness, and then we get the scene that's the empty apartment, and the Depeche Mode song comes on the radio.
That's right. And we know that 80s means nothing good.
Right.
And the song is
Never Let Me Down Again.
Never Let Me Down Again, which sounds hopeful, but if you know that the 80s, again, all I've played of the game is that opening scene. I do know some other things. I don't know anything about where the series goes, how much it sticks to the plot, but we know 80s are trouble, and
that
we know
song's
that
from 87.
And so it feels like
well, and the first line is, I'm taking a ride with my best friend. I hope he never lets me down again. He knows where he's taking me to where I want to be. I'm taking a ride with my best friend. I hope he never lets me down again. Promises me I'm as safe as houses as long as I remember who's wearing the trousers. I hope he never lets me down again.
So we'll see. We'll see who is or isn't let down and where things go.
Yeah, this is a 9-episode first season. And I did end up watching the second episode shortly after watching the first, even though I've seen them already. So we don't always do a full like episode recap like that, but I think that for some reason I felt like it was useful in this, because I think it sets us up to talk about the different questions that we like to ask about the pilots. First of which is sort of the hook. So you being the one who watched this for the first time, maybe if you want to sort of react to that and to also maybe the questions that this brought up for you. Because I think going over the episode really gave us the set and setting piece. Yeah,
there's a little bit I want to talk about all of that. But yeah, it's and it's hard because I think this is a story about Joel and Ellie, despite the fact that we only see them together for a few minutes.
Yeah.
But I think the hook is, how does a father who is living. It's what happens when the world ends. Always. What happens to humanity after the world ends?
Right.
That's obvious. It's always the question.
Yeah. I mean, that's our through line for the last 4.
Exactly. But this one is like, what happens when a grieving father is kind of like given a chance to sort of like a do-over, right? Like, because now it's his job to protect, reluctantly, but to protect Ellie.
Right. And also how that relationship is different after the world ends versus the relationship he had with his actual daughter.
Yeah. I mean, the showrunners would have you, I think, say that the log line is something like, what lengths will a father go to protect his child, to protect a child? I mean, Ellie's a stand-in now for Sarah, right? Not actually his child, but in the place of.
Right.
Right?
I think so. I mean, I think that in this first episode, it's hard for me to separate what I know about what's to come. Because in this first episode, we're set up with Joel and Ellie as this new sort of father-daughter pair. And in a way, it becomes more that later on, and it also becomes less that. And it's interesting to think about the differences. I'm interested in the differences between his relationship with Sarah, who's this innocent almost, and Ellie, who's very much not. But I think you're right in that if you had to nail down the thesis of this first episode, that would be it. It's like he's presented with another opportunity.
Right. There's a reason we spend so much time. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a reason we spend so much time meeting Sarah, learning to love Sarah, and seeing their dynamic. Right? If it weren't about that,
exactly,
he wouldn't need to have a child in the early scene.
Absolutely. So in terms of that, do you want to go to like the questions that this asks or that we ask after seeing this, or do you want to talk like set and setting?
Well, the only thing I really, in terms of set and setting, we talked a lot about it throughout as it compares to the other shows and all. There's something that I couldn't put a finger on that maybe you can, and it's that color palette. I don't know why that's the thing that I always go back to with these shows, where it's like somewhere between. I don't think I saw a primary color the entire time. There's no, like, even the reds aren't really red, they're maroon. Like, everything is earth tone, but not in the way that, but it feels different than Silo. And I can't figure out what it is exactly. But did I say this out loud? Yeah, I don't think I saw a single primary color the whole time. Yeah, everything is like brown or green or purple or.
It's very much that classic zombie movie aesthetic, honestly. Like, and I know that they don't love the comparison to zombie aesthetics, but everything is brown and green, and everything has sort of let's see, how can I explain this in terms of the color theory of it all? Like, Fallout did have those pops of primary colors, and it had like an overall tone of blue, but it was like a lighter blue. This has a very brown and green, like, gradient map on top of it, which is not actually, it's probably a lot, but anyway, it's also much physically darker than some of the others. Like, even Silo, which is literally underground, is not as dark visually for the most part as this was. This, like, the tone in Silo is more of a blue tone. The tone in this is more of a green and brown. Like, that's just...
Even in the scenes that take place in 2003, before we get the time jump, like, that color palette is still there. So it's not even a matter of, like, we're doing it to draw a difference between before and after.
Yes. We talked about how in Station 11, the color palettes changed in different time frames. And here, I think there is a slight change. It does get slightly darker. But most of what we see in the 2003 period is at night. Not all of it. We see a brief daytime, morning at the house, making breakfast, all of that stuff. But it does kind of, when it goes from day to night, like, we start in the morning, we go through a day.
But
she
even
goes
that
to
feels
the watch
more like
store.
Muted to me.
Definitely. You know what it feels like to me is, you know how the sky gets weird before a storm, like a tornado?
Jody, that's exactly it. It feels like that yellow, overcast whatever is on top of everything.
Yeah. Like you're about to get like a really wicked thunderstorm or a tornado.
100%. That's exactly what it feels like. Yes.
Yeah. And so we get that in the daytime. And so even daytime feels muted and hazy. And then in the nighttime, that's immediately into the color palette that we're going to be with forever. It's a little bit cleaner. Like nothing has that griminess to it that we get later on, but it is dark and like yellow brown.
And now that you say that, that makes, and tying back to what we said about the cold open, which plants the seed to sort of let things simmer, it feels like it happens very quickly, but we know it's not the case. We know that it's been happening since...
Takes 30 years.
Right. And so it, as opposed to Station 11, where it is really fast. So that switch is sort of necessary, and it does make sense that the palette changes that quickly, as opposed to this, where it is more gradual, even if also all at once.
Right. Totally.
Thank you. I feel better now. I was really like trying to work through what I thought they were doing there, and that feels right to me.
This is another show where like I have the brightness all the way up on my TV, and I'm like, I still can't see what's happening. I think it's interesting that the creator or showrunner of Chernobyl was the one to take this on. I mean, I know you haven't seen Chernobyl, but it's incredibly atmospheric and beautifully done. And it has that same feeling of like an unknown danger in the air, which in that case was like nuclear fallout. But like there's a very specific scene in Chernobyl of people on a bridge where you're like, oh no. And like, that's the feeling that you get in so many moments in this show. Is there anything else about that sort of set and setting that we need to address?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of it while we were moving through, right? Is there anything you have outstanding there?
No, I would just remain incredibly impressed by the production team, both practical effects and VFX, and the way that they work together. They did so much practically, and like, I don't want to make it sound like that is necessarily just a good thing in and of itself, but they did so much practically so that the very necessary and important VFX work had a lot to work with. There's a scene later in a much later episode where there's like a horde of those clickers, and in that shooting they had 200 costumes made, individual detailed clicker costumes, which they then multiplied by 3 in VFX, but they had literally 200 already to work with to expand on.
Whenever I'm like, man, this show looks really good, I wonder what the deal is. Like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean practical effects don't always mean better.
Right.
But when you can get the balance right between letting the practical effects do what they need to do and then using computers to pick up the slack or do what they're good at, you can tell this show looks great.
And they worked so closely together. Like the VFX people literally did drone 3D mapping. They did LiDAR of all of the atmosphere, like environments that they were going to have to add to. So like they would 3D scan and LiDAR map like a whole area of like street. And then in practical, there would be burned out cars and there would be all this stuff. But then you see them like lay on top of it the layers of VFX that then take the base that was created really carefully and practical and add more like weeds breaking through the concrete than could have been practically put there, right? And more layers of dirt and grime that couldn't be added in the moment. But the base of it is all practical, and then it was prepared so carefully in this collaboration between the two halves of it. It's fascinating to watch. There's clearly so much respect back and forth between the two.
That's very cool. And it reminds me of, I haven't done a ton of research into how Fallout was made, but we do know that because we know that one scene was shot, or one set is shot at Wade's Salvage Yard in Echo, New Jersey, South Jersey, Pine Barrens. Thank you very much. And they did something similar, I think, where it's like, I know they went out to scout pieces from that area and they liked the salvage yard so much. The scene, we talked about it a little bit, that leads into Philly, where all of the old time period accurate cars are and the woods are all grown up, all weird and crazy looking because it's the Pine Barrens and they're weird and crazy looking. is a lot of that is practical and was filmed on a real, actually in the forest, in the woods, in the Pine Barrens, and then layered on top. And those scenes also look great and feel real and lived in a way that you can tell. It makes a difference.
I mean, like, none of this is spoilers because it's just settings. But like later on, there's a mall scene in an abandoned mall that was it was Northfield Mall that was about to be torn down. And so they were able to kind of do whatever they wanted with the space because it was just going to come down right after. I've talked endlessly about the Bill and Frank episode. Bill and Frank's town, or Bill's town, is an actual town that was flooded. And like all the houses were then destroyed, but there's still a street and street signs and like the structure of a town. And so they actually built half-built houses on those streets to then add VFX to make them look more realistic. Like they use real places as much as they possibly could. There's like a scene in a very crazy winter storm town later on also. There's this big action scene. And they chose, this is just a funny story, they chose this town specifically because of the amounts of snowfall it gets. And then when they went to film, there wasn't nearly as much snow as they wanted there to be. So I
knew you were going to say that. Yeah, that's so funny.
They went to nearby towns and like they went to the actual town outside. They brought in 350 dump trucks of actual snow, dumped it around a 10-block radius.
And they could have done that with computers. We would have been able to tell probably, but they could have done it.
They brought it in, they groomed it, they like raked it, they put it where they wanted it, and then they brought in these huge wind machines. And then that night before shooting, guess what happened?
It snowed.
It snowed.
And so then is there way more snow than they
originally...
No,
it didn't snow super heavily, but
still.
But that, I'm sure, like added a nice layer of realism on top of it.
Yeah, totally. See, and you just don't get all of that without
so much effort and like...
It makes me really happy to hear the pendulum kind of swinging back. It always happens with this stuff. Everybody got so excited about computers and
VFX.
Yes, thank you. And computers and VFX and what can be done that we got way too far in that direction.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see, especially big productions, although that's part of it is that big productions can afford
HBO,
to do things like bring in 350 dump trucks.
Yep.
But it is really cool to see it swinging, kind of settling somewhere where we're making the mark together in really exciting useful
and
ways.
Like showing respect for each craft, right? Like production design, practical production design is a huge like multi-person process team effort, but so is VFX, and both are important. And if you rely on only one or only the other in today's film, you just miss out. You have to use both.
Exactly.
I do want to briefly touch on the sound in this. There's a few interesting notes about it. The sounds that the clickers make, we don't hear very much in this first episode, but it becomes a huge thing. And that's very faithful to the game. Apparently, most, if not all of those sounds came from two people.
Oh, really? Just recording probably for like a week. All day, every day.
So there's this woman that was responsible for the sounds of the clickers in the game. And then they brought in a man because they needed a different like male voice. But Craig Mazin, there's like this great scene of him with them in a sound booth, and he refers to them as the Adam and Eve of the clickers.
The team behind the show wanted the clickers to sound just like they did in the games. So they brought in Misty Lee, who originated the sounds for the games.
That's her.
As well as Philip Kovacs for the male clicker sounds. It created one unique recording session.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, that was a good one. I was back here going,
I felt juicy.
I love that so much, Craig going, that sounded juicy.
Thank you to One More Take, the One More Take TikTok for providing us with that.
That's actually clipped directly from the video I was talking about.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So there's that. And then there's also the music. There's a composer named Gustavo Santaolalla. I hope I said that right. Elia, excuse me. Who is a composer that uses actual instruments, but he also made a bunch of the sounds from like found objects. He basically made what he called like modern primitive folk instruments, because that's how they would have made sound after the apocalypse. Apparently Neil would pitch him the stories and then he would just write from that.
That's such a cool idea. Again, something you don't have to do, but it adds a layer of detail that us listening, I'm not like, oh, that sounds like a saw.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, he was using like pipes and things, and it's very cool. It was very cool to watch him do it. But yeah, all that to say, like, when we think about why this feels so epic and so real and so lived in, literally there was an interview with the woman who plays Tess, whose name I'm losing, Anna Torv, where she was talking about that scene where she and Joel are climbing up the ladder to get to the Fireflies headquarters. She said she looked down at the like crap she was climbing over, and there was literally like sesame seeds to mimic mouse poop. Like, it's that macro and micro at the same time of all of the details they were working with. So that's very cool.
Really makes such a difference, because then you get better performances from the actors, and it just all kind of works together.
Yeah. The actors talked about how they would go into the sets and just be like, you could just turn 360 and everything looks real and incredible. So
it's very cool.
It does make a difference, I think. So questions that this brings up for us. After seeing just this first episode, because I've obviously seen the whole season, so it's a little tricky for me to remember, but I will try what I thought after the pilot. But what are the things you want to know after seeing this?
I've got one big one and two specific to the episode that I know that I'm sure we'll find more about later. The two little ones are, I guess there are a few. How's Tommy doing? Right? What's going on with Tommy?
Right, yeah.
Who's Riley? And what did Marlene tell Ellie? Those are the ones that they set up for us as questions that they tease and we don't get answers for. I want to know what, more broadly, what Joel has been up to the last 20 years, how he and Tess came to know each other, what his, like, does he have greater plans? Is it just to exist through this world? Because we know right now he's working these jobs for a purpose. He's saving. He wants to leave to go find Tommy.
Right.
But, like, you know, how does he picture this world kind of playing out for him over the next however many years?
That's interesting.
And then, obviously, the big one for me is what's up with Ellie? Why is she such precious cargo, right? Why is it so important that, and why do the Fireflies specifically need her so badly?
Right.
How about you?
Yeah, no, that all makes sense. It's so funny. I was thinking about when you said I might keep watching, I'm not sure. I watched the pilot of this and was like, I could take it or leave it. And I wasn't actually going to watch more of it. And then I think it was probably the Prestige TV podcast, which I bring up constantly, that was watching it and doing recaps. And like sometimes I will watch TV shows so that I can listen to the podcasts about them, just because I like the podcasters. Hopefully there's someone out there that feels that way about us, but
it's a different kind of lunatic where I will just listen to the podcasts anyway, having not watched the
the only reason I'm still watching
it,
certain TV shows is because I like to listen to people talk about them. And that's what happened here. After the first episode, I was like, am I curious a little bit about this kid and the guy? Like, sure. Like, but I wasn't convinced.
Right. And I wonder, here's a question. I know it's going to be hard for you to say this now. Did you have a guess as to what the deal was with Ellie?
I think I did. I think I knew enough or had heard accidentally enough to know what was up with her, like what the reason that she was so important was. I think I knew that. I think I probably assumed it and also had been spoiled mildly about that specific thing. That's
what I'm trying to figure out is I think I would have assumed it even if I didn't know.
Yeah.
Because I think I do know.
Yeah.
And knowing that, or even if I didn't know, even if I'd gone in
they
being
give plenty
like,
of hints in the first episode.
Well, that's what I mean. And it's like, what else could it, at this point, what else could it be? And what is it setting up for Joel's relationship with her?
Right.
You know? Because otherwise, this becomes a story where Ellie Joel is protecting Ellie to bring her to a place so that she is protected because question mark. And who kind of cares? There has to be something more complicated.
Yeah,
and
the
I think
stakes
I would
are too
think
small
that no matter
otherwise.
Yeah, I think I would have thought that no matter what, and that would have led me to a pretty good close guess to what's going on here, I think. And because of that, I don't know that in both universes, the one where I already know or the one where I think I know, I don't know that that's compelling enough for me to watch then.
Right. And I think that was my experience of the pilot. And if it wasn't for the podcasts that I listened to, kind of watching ahead of where I was and praising what was to come, like I think that was why I kept going. It was like, well, whatever, I can watch a couple more episodes and see, since these people whose opinions I really respect about other shows say this is worth it, I can give it another hour or two of my life and just see. And then I got to Bill and Frank and I was like weeping and was like, I will watch this to the end regardless now, just because they've done this so well. What else can they pull that will be super moving and interesting? And I don't think that it ever meets that high watermark again, but it does get so much better than the pilot. In my opinion, I think that the pilot is it's an important like place setting, setup of everything episode. I do not think by far it's one of the best episodes of the season. I think there's a bunch that are better. Okay. I think the mall episode is better. I think the Bill and Frank episode is better. I think we do meet Melanie Linsky eventually. Like, how could that be bad? You know, like there's a lot to come beyond this pilot that I think is so much more interesting than this pretty boilerplate setup of a post-apocalyptic, situation.
And I do wonder if I would have felt differently too if we hadn't just watched a couple of really great post-apocalyptic shows that do something that take the genre, because that's the other thing is like, it does feel, other than the cordyceps being the spreader and what they do, and I do think that's really interesting and unsettling, and it is a cool twist, but otherwise you could still tell this story and have it just be, I don't know, mutation, and now some of us are zombies, and the rest of it, so far, would still work. So and it's just not a genre that I am, despite the fact that I love Fallout and Station 11 so much now, it's not a genre that I mean,
to be fair, with Fallout and Station 11, like, those shows I think also get better after the pilot. And I think, like, my argument for Last of Us is partly the queerness in it, because it's just so refreshing to see. And it's not just the Bill and Frank episode, it's Ellie and her experiences. It's watching such an amazing young actor as Bella Ramsey inhabit this role. Like, I do think that this starts out much more generic post-apocalyptic show than it ends up.
You know what it feels to me just watching the pilot, as you're saying that, I'm realizing too, that doesn't feel the same with Fallout and Station 11, that made those two more compelling to me, is, and this probably isn't the case, but it feels to me like I have seen the corners of this world that I need to see. I know there are the Fireflies, I know there's Fedra, I know that there's the regular people, there's the Joel people, and what we're going to learn is how they all interact and all of that.
Which is funny because I don't think that that's actually the case. I think this is much more like Station 11, where the pilot takes place in one location that we kind of never see again.
That's interesting. And then because Station 11, though, the pilot takes place in that one location, but you can feel, and that 20-year jump and all hints at so much more beyond the edges of it.
Yeah.
And
they don't give us that in this. We get we see the outside world kind of very briefly at night.
But it feels like the inside world in a lot of ways.
And that doesn't stay the same. Not to spoil anything, but like it literally does. Everything visually changes immediately as they leave the QZ.
See, and that's really good to know, and something that having this conversation with you now makes me feel probably a little more likely to continue with the show in a way that I didn't feel before.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I'm going to say this, but I would give it till Bill and Frank at least, just to have that experience. If after Bill and Frank you're like, I'm good, I would say cool. But I think that I just
watched episode 3.
Yeah. I just rewatched episode 2. it does do a lot of that. Like, you get to see, or they're still in, not to spoil, it's not going to, they're still in the general Boston area, but they're outside the QZ, and everything is drastically visually different. Cool. In a very cool way. Again, the production design like shines. And you get one more sort of inciting incident for their journey that you think is then going to be followed up in the next episode, but instead we get the Bill and Frank bottle episode, which relates to a few things that happened before that. So my pitch would be, give it 2 more hours of your life, and then if you stop, you stop. But and that's not just for you, but that's mainly for you, because I know you like to cry.
I love to cry.
And I feel like Bill and Frank, I know I'm overhyping it. And at this point, like, I think part of the joy of it was I had no idea what I was getting into. But even if I had known, I don't think I would have understood what I was going to see and feel. So I think it's worth that.
I'll try to do that between now and... But do I need episode 2? I can't skip 2 and just go right to 3, even though it's bottle episode?
You can, but I think 2 is worth watching for its own... for its own merits. Like, I think that it is... I think it's a good bridge, actually, because we're in the darkness and the misery of the QZ in the first episode. In the second episode, we're outside of it and we're seeing more what the rest of the world looks like. It's almost like we're shifting amounts of light. Like the darkness of the QZ, then like this like outside world that's very bleak but brighter and more interesting and more colorful and more visually alive. And then episode 3 with Bill and Frank is that times 100 in some ways, because it's got so much life in it. It's kind of a nice arc.
Okay,
I feel like it's worth it.
I'm gonna try to give them both give those 2 episodes a whirl before you and I talk next. So hopefully I can weigh in on. I can report back on. I
would love to hear your reactions to both episodes. Obviously, mainly to the third one, but I do think that a lot happens in the second one that is necessary for the rest of the series to make sense.
Okay,
and visually, it's just stunning.
And I'm going to do it.
Nice. So that's, I think, it for us for The Last of Us. I'm so glad we actually decided to do it. I feel like it made a lot of sense with the other stuff we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't necessarily a given that we were going to cover it, but I'm glad that we did. And should we talk about next week?
Yeah, let's talk about next week.
So, like I said, next week is less post-apocalyptic destroyed landscape and more future dystopia. But I feel like that's a natural progression in some ways. You haven't seen this, correct?
Nope. I don't know anything about it. I thought it was...
You thought it was Succession.
I thought it was Succession.
Which it is not. Although I did like Succession, it does not seem to be something that makes sense in our world here. But we are watching the Apple TV show, or the pilot of it, Severance, with our dear Adam Scott and Zach Cherry, who we've seen recently. It's a great cast overall. I think that it's going to be interesting to talk about because it does have sort of the same feeling of some sort of mysterious government conspiracy overlord that we had in like Fallout and Silo. But it's just such a different visual environment. It's really gorgeously shot. Like, again, it's visually a very interesting place. I'm anxious to see what you think. I watched the whole first season. The second season's coming out, I believe, in the beginning of next year. And I just think it's an interesting comparison. Again, it's one of those where I'm like, I watched it, I liked it. I'm not obsessed with it, but it was interesting to kind of puzzle through and think about and pull apart as a show itself. So, especially compared to what we've talked about. What's the log line? Log line officially?
Yeah. I'm afraid to look it up. I don't want to be spoiled.
No, that's smart. Okay, yeah, this is not a spoiler. This is how they advertised it. So, Severance is an American science fiction psychological thriller television series created by Dan Erickson and directed by Ben Stiller and Aoife McArdle. starring Adam Scott, Zach Cherry, and a number of other people, including John Turturro, Christopher Walken, Patricia Arquette. Like, there's some big names in there that show up.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So the log line, the plot follows Mark S., an employee of a fictional corporation named Lumon Industries, who agrees to a severance program in which his non-work memories are separated from his work memories.
Okay, I'll do it.
And that's it. That's all you're going to find out.
I agree. They can take my work memories. I don't need them.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And that's the interesting thing is, like, that's kind of how people ended up doing it. Mm-hmm. I will say, for our New Jersey is the World friends, as soon as I saw the name Lumon Industries, I thought of
Tilcon.
Tilcon.
That's right.
Tilcon. But yeah, so it's available on Apple TV only, I believe. Apologies, but excuse me, if you watched Silo, you probably have Apple TV.
There's a lot of good stuff on there.
Yeah, I restarted it recently. I will probably,
keep it for a little while.
Yeah, go through everything.
Such a funny game we all have to play now.
I know, it's so stupid. The pilot episode is called Good News About Hell.
I like that.
Came out on February 18th, 2022. Again, another pandemic prestige show.
Great.
So, yeah. So we'll talk about that next week.
Looking forward to it.
That's it for us this week. We will see you next week for Severance. Where can they find us?
Oh, at WatchersPodNJ on Instagram, WatchersPodNJ at Gmail, and also as the #1 show on one of those. I'm not even going to give it a shout out because that's what it wants, but one of those friggin' fake
aggregator ranking
lists
things
that want shows to promote them. But if you Google top Yellow Jackets podcasts,
there is a list that we're on
on at least one site.
We're actually the top one, which is crazy.
That's right. Yeah, so they can. I think they think we're the ones who need it badly enough to promote for them.
Yeah.
But I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I won't promote for them, but
yeah.
So they can find us there too if they want. That's all the places.
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram at Jodie_Mim, JODIE_MIM.
And I'm at AQ Andrea Q.
And we will see you next week at work.